Since both of your films played relatively early in the program, I was hoping that you could just reintroduce yourselves to the audience and remind them of your films.
My name is Angeline Gragasin. My film was the first film called Myself When I Am Real. It's the very first film shot on mini DV.
Hello, my name is Melody Gao. I'm the director of Swimming Lessons. It was the third film that showed. It's a coming-of-age documentary set in Beijing. Includes some things including cooking watermelon and learning how to say goodbye.
Everyone's like, oh, right, the watermelon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think I'll start with questions for you. So I've got a few questions, and then I'm hoping that you all have some questions as well. And I'm sure you do. So I'm going to start with some questions for you, Angeline. And actually, it's speaking to the mini DV of the film. Both, I'm wondering, maybe two questions. One specifically, what about mini DV? And then more broadly, what about kind of having it be like someone's holding the camera? What did that open up for you as a storyteller?
Yeah, mini DV came after the script was already written. I started working with my DP to consider what camera to use and why. I realized because the film is called Myself When I Am Real, and I was interested in this idea of realness and authenticity and identity and how that shifts between the public and the private space. I became interested in the aesthetics of realness, and I decided I wanted it to look and feel like a home movie. I wanted the perspective of the camera to be that of a guest at this party. And then we thought, at first I was like, oh, it would be cool to do on VHS. And then my DP said, well, actually, it would be cooler if we shot it on a camera that was era appropriate, because the film is set in the year 2000, so let's use a mini DV camera, because that's what guests at this party would be using. And one of the references he brought to my attention was a film called Festen, or The Celebration, by Thomas Vinterberg, Dogma 95 film, if you're familiar. And so we shot on the same camera that they shot that film on, except whereas they had taken that mini DV footage and transferred it to 35 millimeter film, we kept it on mini DV. So everything you saw was in camera. There's no post-production effects, there's no color correction, there's not even fake glitches. All of those glitches are real in camera, unintended, but I think a very happy accident because it makes it feel more authentically aged. It feels like an archival home movie. I forgot the second question you asked me.
Well, I'll bounce it back to you, because it made me think about what you were talking about, made me think about some really specific, when you're saying it feels like a home movie. I feel like one of my favorite scenes, and I'm sure for a lot of you folks, is the when she sings Ave Maria. And what I feel like what the kind of it being a home movie allows is for this kind of break in rhythm to the movie, where we kind of had been popping in and out different moments, and then we get this 4-minute song performance. And it really, I'm guessing 4 minutes, it feels long. And then we really get to feel both we all experience the drama of finding, of having Jasmine kind of find her voice as she's doing it, and then also the terror of them being one more time, and having it come again. So I think that my second part of my question was just thinking a little bit more about this idea of you kind of being able to kind of use a mix of documentary and narrative storytelling, and maybe if you wanted to speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel like we're awkwardly passing the mic. Look, what is this carpet? What is it? Are we supposed to stand here?
Maybe, I don't know.
Come here in the square with me. I think she sings "Oh Holy Night."
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
I didn't grow up in that religion.
It's a Christmas song, pop song, you could consider it. A lot of Jews wrote Christmas songs, I discovered in the process of researching. I'm half Jewish, researching songs for this film. Anyway, the question of home movie and documentary approach. I also work in documentary, and so I was also interested in this kind of hybrid approach, because the story is quite autobiographical, and I'm reenacting a lot of events from my own childhood and my own life. And so again, I was just very, very interested in trying to make it look and feel as real as possible. And And even, you know, that one unbroken take of Jasmine singing the Christmas song, "Oh Holy Night," you know, that's designed to feel a little bit excruciating. There are parts in the film where I'm playing with time and our perception of time and how that shifts depending on whether or not the film is or isn't edited. And I wanted to even feel, it happens in chronological order. My intention was, you know, to some extent to make it feel like in-camera editing, and I know it's not quite that, but I wanted to mask as much as possible the construction of the film and make you feel like you just popped in a mini DV tape into the, you know, camera and are playing back what had been shot. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I was also hoping you could speak. Actually, we kind of came up. Like, what is it about Christmas? Why did this have to be a Christmas party? What did that allow into the story?
Well, first and foremost, it allowed me to use royalty-free music. This was initially written just to be a party, just a house party, no purpose. And I thought, a birthday party? What's the occasion? What's the occasion? Then I was researching karaoke songs, and I was like, oh God, I'm gonna have to license a pop song. It's gonna be exorbitantly expensive. And then I was like, aha, Christmas music, you know, from a certain era is royalty-free. And then I was like, oh, that's perfect, because now it can be a Christmas party, and that, you know, is even more painful and awkward and dysfunctional and has just more rife with storytelling and conflict and family drama, and, you know, social status and performance and all of these things. So that was the impetus, but it, you know, it turned out to be this happy accident that I think added a lot and also gave us some insight into, like, just the tradition, like culturally specific tradition, Filipino Christmas, kind of blending Catholicism with American, you know, consumerist Christmas, and how they are one and the same in this environment.
That's great. I have more questions, but I'm going to ask Melody some questions, and I want to make sure that we have time for questions from y'all as well. Okay, so Melody, do you guys switch? I don't know.
Sure. Okay, we'll switch.
Well, Melody, I actually wanted to start with asking you about the camera in your film as well, because experiencing it as a viewer the first time I saw it, I was kind of like, oh, is it a documentary? Is it an essay film? Is it pulling together a lot of archival footage? And I found you kind of modulating between a bunch of different kinds of storytelling. Sometimes it would feel like we're watching a kind of like documentary, the kind that sort of would be observational, where we were just like looking out on the world and we're seeing these views. And then other times like y'all were like addressing the camera, and there was a lot of real intimacy with that. How did you come up with that strategy?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it was kind of accidental in some ways. The film became very observational because trying to film with my grandparents and my family, I realized that I couldn't really direct them because they were in their own apartment. They didn't want to like move around with the camera. So basically it ended up being me just filming kind of slices of life. And that's kind of how those intimate moments would happen. And it took a while. I was in Beijing for about 3 weeks. And it took a little while for my family to warm up to the camera, and I wanted to make sure they were fully comfortable. And I went through different iterations. At one point, I thought maybe I would animate the whole film in case my grandparents didn't want to be in camera. Thank goodness they did, because that would have taken much longer to make. But I think a lot of the observational and kind of the more intimate moments did come more naturally. I realized from hearing from like audiences and talking to different people that my family is very goofy, especially my younger sister. And so she added a lot of that comedic lightness that I think the film really needed.
Yeah, the scenes where she's teasing your grandfather are like some of my favorite ones. Can you talk about kind of another kind of thing that I found was really kind of innovative about the film is a lot of times short films in particular will kind of cordon off like a moment, and even though this was taking place over the course of 3 weeks, it feels kind of like you really had a whole canvas of time to be playing with, from like going back to your childhood, going back even to your grandparents telling stories and your mother telling stories. How did you kind of figure out, like, where does this begin, where does this end?
A lot of it came together kind of in the editing room. Kind of going in, I thought I had an idea of what the film was going to be. It was starting off, I thought it would be a lot more investigative, looking into my cousin's passing, and it was something that my family had talked about briefly, but once I got to China, no one wanted to talk about, partially because she was younger when she passed, and also because I think there's a lot of secrecy around death and grief and not really wanting to talk about it because it feels in a way kind of shameful. And I think the film, a lot of it, and I think kind of connecting to perhaps Angeline's film, the feelings of teenage angst, and also a little bit of the loneliness, and I feel like a lot of the kind of growing up, your parents tell you that they'll tell you things when you get older, when you can understand, but then as people slowly start leaving your life, a lot of those stories are lost with them. And so I think throughout the process, I had a lot of those questions, feeling both kind of anger and sadness for not having those answers, for not knowing how to say goodbye, but ultimately kind of learning throughout the process that there is no way to kind of learn how to say goodbye. And that was something that I learned throughout the process of making the film. Kind of naively going in, I thought I would learn, but I think it was kind of a growing up lesson for me as well.
There's the moment, speaking to kind of like your investigation and learning that there's, maybe that's, I'm thinking of that last scene, or this near last scene of the film where it's you and your mother under the net, and she is kind of like free associating, but bringing together so many of the themes of the film and also bringing in new things for us all to think about. It's a really kind of beautiful extended moment between the two of you. One, I suppose I just wanted to mention how much I like that scene, but also how, like from a filmmaking point of view, it's like, wow, her mother's really good at talking off the cuff on a lot of real serious stuff and making sure that somebody who doesn't know anybody in there can follow. Is this a continuation of a documentary practice that you've done before with your family, or is your mom just a natural?
My mom just has a lot of wisdom and always a lot of advice. I don't know if anybody else can relate to that, but I feel like the parents, they always are trying to share wisdom and little granules of things to try to help you. This is actually my very first documentary, my first film. I made this as part of my thesis film at UC Santa Cruz. And the scene under the mosquito nets with my mom, I kind of, throughout the process of filming, I show kind of like the disasters with the AC breaking, getting sick, and I think the mosquito net scene happened my very last night that I was there, and I was panicking. I was like, I'm gonna have to drop out of grad school, I don't have a film, and so kind of very miraculously, I had all these questions that I had been kind of scared to ask. Going into filming, questions that I thought I could ask my grandparents, but realized that I couldn't. And I was able to ask my mom about them. And I think throughout this process and her kind of seeing me try to kind of discover these answers, I think she was able to kind of reflect about it and kind of give me a lot of advice about it as well. And it's kind of a conversation that I don't think we have really had. And I think after making the film and kind of opening up these conversations, we've been able to talk about it more.
Are there any questions from the audience for either Melody or Angeline? Yes.
My question's for Angeline. Could you talk about your casting process?
Sure. The question was, can I talk about my casting process? This project started out as a feature, and I decided during the pandemic to focus on taking a scene, a pivotal scene from the film that had always been in the very, very first draft of the feature, and isolating that and expanding it into a short with a beginning, middle, and end as a way to develop the story world and the characters of the film in a more focused way. And so in February 2020, you'll remember something happened in 2020, March, I started workshopping the feature script with several actors. Therese Dizon, who plays Annette, the mother, Bing Magtoto, who plays this character Princess. She's the older woman with the gray hair. And other actors who are not pictured here because they play characters who exist in the feature but not in the short. So we started workshopping it, and I did a public, like a staged reading for feedback, kind of a work in progress thing. And then the pandemic happened, and I was just writing, rewriting throughout that process. So I had early on, 2020, begun working with actors and workshopping. And so over the course of many, many years, I continued to develop these relationships. And then we came together again in fall 2022 when the short script was locked and started rehearsing again. So there's a lot of rehearsal with actors over an extended period of time, and also a lot of improvisation. I am not fluent in Tagalog. I wrote what I could. It was filler. You know, more or less what I thought it should be, but the actors who really were able to bring that to life. And I don't know if you've seen the film Drive My Car. Anyone? Has anyone seen that film? Woo. It's a multilingual film. Well, anyway, it depicts a director who is directing in multiple languages that he himself does not speak. And I kind of felt like I was in that position when I was directing, but still I understand. I understand enough to know, and also just from like tone of voice and body language and having grown up in a Tagalog speaking household, I know it when I hear it and when I see it. So anyway, they contributed so much to what you're seeing on screen. It truly was a collaboration. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the audience? Yes.
I have a question for Angeline. You mentioned that this short was autobiographical. I'm wondering what the experience of bringing this to life, how that impacted you.
The question was about the degree to which the film is autobiographical and how that affected the storytelling.
It was very therapeutic, but also traumatic. I mean, to like reenact one's childhood trauma. And I know, like, look, it's like a Christmas party where a girl gets bitten by a dog and like yelled at by her mom. It's not like, you know, there's a lot worse trauma one could go through. It's, so anyway, I just want to acknowledge that. Nonetheless, to put oneself back in that headspace, this childhood memory space, is very painful and difficult. And, you know, it's not 100%, it's heavily fictionalized. It's not 100% my life by any means. However, because I am drawing on my personal experience, it's still very challenging, especially when I'm trying to create characters who are like multidimensional and flawed, but also I'm trying to be compassionate and empathetic and show, you know, all sides. So that as an exercise in and of itself, like, creates compassion and empathy. Like, I have so much more empathy for my own mother, having gone through this experience, and for myself as well as a child, because I had a lot of guilt and shame around, you know, like not being able to speak Tagalog, among other things. So yeah, it's a very transformative process, but I also had to pause on the project after having gone through this, not just because of the process of writing and directing it, but also just making a movie is really hard, and like finding the money, and you know, things fall apart. Just the logistics of filmmaking can be overwhelming, and when the project is very personal, that can also take a toll. So I had to finish this, press pause, and like work on a different project for now to recover from that. But I think that's the nature of filmmaking, no? I don't know if you have something to add to that, Melody.
I feel like just making my first film, I feel like I've had to recover a lot from the process. In some ways I can relate. It is in some ways therapeutic, you're kind of processing things, and other times I think, especially when you're working with something personal, it's kind of, I feel like sometimes it brings things out of you that you don't expect.
Yeah, totally.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, this is for Melody. I mean, your grandparents were absolute superstars. I mean, you know, it's just so enjoyable watching them interact with you and your sister. Have they seen the film?
The question was about the grandparents and if they've seen the film.
They've seen clips of it. I have to translate and recaption the film so that my grandparents can watch it. They saw like parts of it and they've liked it so far. The scariest part I think was actually showing it to my mom. Throughout the process, they were like, I was almost done editing, and then she was like, maybe we shouldn't show this film to anybody. Can we just like, and I think she's more nervous about having kind of talking about the heavier things in the family or her being on camera. But once she watched the film, I think she kind of understood it more, and kind of seeing other people's reactions. The first time she saw it, and like seeing the watermelon scene and all these things, I think she was able to kind of appreciate it more. And it's the little things like, oh, how does my hair look? Things like that that they're more worried about than actually, I think, sometimes the themes itself.
Are there more questions? Melody, I was actually hoping you could also speak a little bit about the music in the film. I feel like on my first viewing, I was so sucked into the story, but watching it this time, I thought there was a lot of really interesting decisions about the music. It changes tone so many times, and it kind of goes in unexpected places. Where did that music come from? How did you make the decision to include what you included?
That's a great question. The composer for the film, her name is Angeline, and I found her on Instagram. And working with her was probably one of my favorite parts of the filmmaking process. She's Taiwanese, and she could have relate to some of the themes of grief, of family, kind of like the hilarity of family as well, the kind of absurdity of being around family and spending the summer with them. And I feel like she just worked her magic. We talked a lot about wanting to use more traditional instruments, so we used the erhu, which is a stringed instrument. She did a lot of incredible vocals, very haunting vocals in parts. And also for the percussion, she was really willing to kind of play around and we used chopsticks instead of drums. And so it was really fun to kind of add that to kind of those moments of levity or kind of the heaviness, or kind of, I think maybe the more ghostly feelings of bringing in those like vocals and the music. But I definitely think the music played an incredible part in the film and felt like a character in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was wondering if y'all had any questions for each other or any responses. I feel like as you've been talking, I've seen new connections between the films. Or not, yeah.
I just want to say I love your film. And I'm very pleased to have gotten to screen alongside it. It felt, very personal, very authentic, very raw, but also very poetic and thoughtfully and carefully composed. And like those are all things I aspire to. So bravo! I just wanted to show you some love because I loved your film.
Thank you so much. I feel like I could say the same. It was so exciting to kind of see the films and how they're kind of in conversation with each other. And I feel like a lot of the emotions in your film, I feel like brought me back to kind of like the angst, the fear, all the feelings of kind of childhood and experiencing that. And I think after this, I'm going to ask you for a lot of advice, so I probably will reach out. But yeah, I'm just very inspired by your film and all the creative ways you managed to tell that story.
Round of applause. I'm going to ask just one last question. Both of y'all mentioned the trauma of finishing a film and how much it depletes you, and yet with this being your first film and this one being part of a planned feature, I do want to know, like, what's next? What are you going to be developing going forward from this?
This is always a fun question. Definitely I want to make more films. I think doing it after doing the first time and it being both rewarding and exhausting and a really great learning process, I'm excited to I think this is just the beginning for me. So I'm going to try to find that momentum and keep going, and hopefully we continue to be surrounded by an incredible community of filmmakers like you.
Wow, what a great answer. I'm working on a new project that's actually set in France. In Paris, and it's actually multilingual as well. It's in French, primarily English and Spanish. And after this, I was like, okay, I'm done making films that are about like me and my life. So this one is 100% fiction. Well, actually it is a hybrid, but it's not a personal story. And I find that very refreshing, and I'm very excited about that.
Wonderful. Well, I'm just so excited to see both of y'all's work. When you bring it back, please come back to San Diego and share it with us again. So now, please, one more warm round of applause.